Think back to the beginning of it. The last time you fell, truly fell for someone, the way they took over your mind. You could not eat, could not sleep, could not think of anything but them. Every song was suddenly about them. Every plan ran through them. The whole world had quietly rearranged itself around a single person. And it felt like the truest thing you had ever known. Not chemistry, not a phase, love itself. Certain, eternal. The real thing at last. And then, slowly, quietly, it cooled. The obsession loosened. The electricity faded. One day, you realized you could think clearly again. And the person who had been the whole of the sky was somehow just a person. Familiar, ordinary, still loved perhaps, but no longer that fire. And somewhere in the cooling, a quiet, frightening question arrived. Is something wrong? With them? With me? Did I choose wrong? Was it ever even real? And that question has ended more relationships than almost anything else. Because we read the fading as a failure, a sign the love has died, or that it was never the real thing at all. But what if it is not a failure? What if that cooling is the single most predictable event in all of human love? Something written in advance into the chemistry of your own brain. Not a sign that something broke, a sign that something went exactly as it was built to. Because the fire you felt was never built to last. It carried, from the very first spark, an expiry date, and that was not a flaw in it. That was the design. The intoxication of new love is not a permanent state. It is a temporary one, a specific, measurable, time-limited condition of the brain, as real as anything you will ever feel, and as passing as a fever. So over the next while, we are going to look at what that fever actually is, why nature lights it, why it must always burn down, and what it was quietly meant to leave behind. Because the saddest mistake in love is not the fading of the fire, it is walking away the very moment it fades, and throwing out the deeper thing that the fire was only ever lit to start. So start with what that fever actually is, because it is not quite what you think. We call it an emotion, a feeling, like joy or sadness. It is not. When scientists slid new lovers into a brain scanner and showed them a photo of the one they adored, the part that lit up was not some tender center of feeling. It was deeper, older, the reward system, the engine of craving and drive buried in the core of the brain. And here is the unsettling part. That exact circuit is the one that lights up for something else entirely, for cocaine, for the drugs that hijack the mind and will not let it go. The brain, in the grip of new love, does not look like a brain feeling something. It looks like a brain on a drug. Which means, when you fell for them, you were not simply in love. In a precise chemical sense, you were high, and the person was the drug. And once you see it that way, every strange symptom of early love suddenly makes sense. It is not romance, it is craving, the obsessive focus on one single person, the euphoria when they are near, the ache, the withdrawal when they are gone, the need for more, always more, one message, one more night, the way nothing else quite matters. That is not the language of feeling, that is the language of addiction. It even explains the blindness, the way in the fever you cannot see their faults. Everyone around you can, your friends, your family, they see it clearly, but you cannot. To you, they are perfect, flawless, the single most remarkable person who has ever lived. That is not clear sight. That is the drug editing your vision, bending reality to keep you fixed on the one thing it wants you to want. So when the poets called love a madness, a fever, a kind of beautiful insanity, they were not reaching for a metaphor. They were describing, with startling accuracy, a real temporary state of the brain. You were not yourself in those first months. You could not have been. You were running on a different chemistry entirely. And to understand why it fades, you first have to know exactly what that chemistry was. So look at the chemistry itself. Because the fever is not one thing, it is a storm of at least three working together. And the first is the one you have heard of. Dopamine, the molecule of wanting, of reward, of chasing the thing just out of reach. It floods the brain in early love, and it delivers the high, the euphoria, the tireless energy, the laser focus on one face. Alongside it comes a second, a cousin of adrenaline, the chemistry of alarm and arousal. This is the racing heart when they walk in, the sweating palms, the jolt in the stomach, the reason you could not eat and could not sleep. Your body, in early love, is running as if under threat, flooded, wired, too hot to rest. It is thrilling, and it is exhausting, and no body could keep it up forever. But the strangest piece is the third, because this one does not rise, it falls. The level of serotonin in the brain of a new lover drops, and that matters enormously, because low serotonin is the fingerprint of another condition entirely. Researchers measured it and found that the brain of someone freshly in love looks, on this one measure, remarkably like the brain of a person with obsessive-compulsive disorder. Sit with what that means. The reason you could not stop thinking about them was not sentiment. It was the same mechanism that drives a person to check a lock again and again. An intrusive thought that will not leave. A loop the mind cannot close. In obsessive-compulsive disorder, it is a fear. In love, it is a face. But the machinery is disturbingly the same. You were not daydreaming about them. You were, quite literally, unable to stop. So put the three together: a brain flooded with craving, a body wired as if in danger, and a mind locked in an obsessive loop it cannot break. That is the fever. That is what falling in love actually is. Not a metaphor, a measurable, chemical storm. Beautiful, overwhelming, and by its very nature impossible to sustain, because no brain could survive that for long. And that is exactly why it has to end. So the fever must end. But why, exactly? And the answer is the same answer as for any drug. The brain adapts. Flood any system with the same intense signal day after day, and it adjusts. It turns down its own sensitivity. It rebuilds its balance around the flood. The receptors grow quieter. The same rush of chemistry that once shook you slowly stops, landing quite so hard. It is the same reason the 10th time you do anything thrilling is never like the first. The brain habituates, it gets used to it, and it gets used to a person. The face that once sent a jolt through you becomes familiar, safe, expected, and familiarity is precisely what the fever cannot survive. The whole state was built on novelty, on mystery, on the unknown, and you cannot keep someone unknown forever. And this is not a tragedy of the body's making, it is a mercy, because that fevered state was never survivable long-term. Imagine it never fading, a whole life unable to eat or sleep or focus on anything but one person. You could not work, you could not raise a child, you could barely function. The obsession that feels so wonderful for a season would be a life sentence if it never lifted. The brain ends it so that you can live again. And it ends on a schedule, not a precise one. Love is not a clock. But there is a rough shape to it, seen again and again. For many people, the wild obsessive phase burns hottest for something like a year, perhaps 2, sometimes a little longer. And then it begins its slow cooling, not vanishing overnight, just settling, dimming from a blaze into something far less frantic. The exact timing varies. That it comes at all does not. So the fading you may have blamed yourself for, or blamed them for, was not a sign that anything had failed. It was the fever doing exactly what fevers do, breaking, on time, as it always was going to, the drug wearing off. Not because the love was false, but because that first blazing chemistry was never the whole of love. It was only the opening act. And to understand what comes next, you have to ask the question we have skipped. Why does nature light this fire at all? Because nature did not give you this fever to make you happy. Evolution does not care whether you are happy. It cares about one thing only: what gets carried into the next generation. And every overwhelming feeling you have, however sacred it feels, is there because some ancestor who felt it out-survived some ancestor who did not. So ask the cold question of the fever. What job was it built to do? And the answer is bonding. The fever exists to glue two people together, fast and hard, for a specific, crucial window of time. Think of what the obsession actually does. It fixes all your attention on one person. It blinds you to alternatives. It makes being apart physically painful. It drives you to merge your life with theirs. It is, in effect, a mechanism for choosing one mate out of all the world and locking on. And for our ancestors, that lock had a purpose with life or death stakes. A child, a human infant, is helpless for years. And in the ancient world, a mother facing that alone faced terrible odds. The fever is nature's way of binding two people close enough for long enough to survive the most dangerous stretch together, long enough to build something that could outlast the fire itself. So the fever is the glue's first set, the violent, total grip. And here is the thing about glue. Once it has set, you do not need that first fierce grip anymore. The intense phase did its job. It brought you together. It held you through the beginning. And once the bond is truly formed, the fever is no longer needed. So nature lets it fade, not to end your love, but because it has already done its work, and something else is meant to take over. So as the fever cools, something else rises to take its place. A second chemistry, quieter, slower, and in its own way far more remarkable than the first. This is the chemistry of attachment. Where the fever ran on craving, this runs on calm, on safety, on the deep, steady pull toward one particular person as home. It is carried by different molecules entirely. The ones released when you are held, when you are close, when you have known someone for a very long time. This is the love you almost never see in the songs. It does not race the heart. It does not rob you of sleep. It is the hand you reach for without looking. The person whose silence is comfortable, the one whose presence lowers your shoulders instead of raising your pulse. It is not the fireworks, it is the warmth after, not the wildfire, but the hearth that a wildfire was only ever lit to start. And here is the great tragedy hidden in all of this, because our whole culture sells you only the fever. Every song, every film, every story of love ends at the height of the blaze, the falling, the obsession, the fireworks, and then the credits roll. No one shows you the hearth. No one teaches you that the fireworks are supposed to fade. So when yours do, you have no story for it except that something has gone terribly wrong. And so people leave, right at the doorway of the deeper thing. They feel the fever fade and they panic. They decide this must not be real love anymore. And they go looking for the fever again, with someone new. And they find it, of course they do. It is only chemistry. It ignites with anyone new enough. And then, a year on, 2, it fades with the new person exactly as it faded before. Some people spend their whole lives this way, chasing the first act over and over, and never once staying for the play. So hear this as plainly as it can be said. The fire was never meant to last. It was meant to light something slower and deeper and warmer, the very thing you were about to throw away. So the fading was never the end of your love. It was a threshold, a handing over from one system to another, from the fever that chooses to the bond that stays. The obsession was the courtship. What comes after is the marriage in the oldest sense of the word. Not lesser, not a consolation prize. The actual destination. The thing, the fever, was only ever a way of reaching. The fire dies precisely because it has delivered you to the hearth. So what do you do with this? The first thing is simply to stop misreading the map, to stop treating the fading of the fever as a verdict. When the wildfire settles into warmth, it does not mean you chose wrong. It does not mean the love is dying. It means you have arrived at the stage the fever was rushing you toward. The panic you feel when the spark cools is the panic of someone who was never told the fire was supposed to. And the second is to stop demanding that one love be the other, to stop asking the hearth to burn like the wildfire. Do not measure a 10-year bond by the standard of a 3-month fever. They are different things, with different gifts. Ask the fever for security, and it has none. Ask attachment for endless fireworks, and it was never built to give them. Judge each by what it actually is, and you stop throwing away gold for failing to be fire. And the third is quietly hopeful, because you are not entirely at the mercy of the chemistry. The fever fades on novelty and feeds on it too. Researchers found something simple. Couples who do new things together, things that thrill, that challenge, that carry a little fear, can spark the old chemistry back to life. The brain cannot tell the difference between the rush of a new person and the rush of a new experience with an old one. So the fire is not gone for good. It can be deliberately rekindled. Not by finding a new person, but by becoming a little new to each other. You came here, perhaps, mourning a fire that faded, wondering if its fading meant that something was lost, or false, or broken. Leave knowing it was none of those. The fever was real, and the fever was always temporary. It was a chemical invitation into a room you could not otherwise have entered, and once it delivered you there, it was always going to quiet. Its fading was not the theft of your love. It was the proof that it had done its work. So do not grieve the fireworks. They were never the love. They were the invitation. The love is what you do with the quiet after they fade. Whether you stay, whether you keep choosing the ordinary, familiar, irreplaceable person the fever first pointed you toward. The fire was only ever the beginning. What you build in its warmth is the thing itself. See what people hide, even from themselves.